newspaper reporter and contributor of articles and book reviews to publications and organizations that include American History Magazine, Politico, the Boston Globe, and the Bill of Rights Institute. Steve has also taught history at Suffolk University and UMass Boston. Tonight he'll be discussing his book, American Treasures, which explores the creation and little-known journeys of such priceless American documents as the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Gettysburg Address, as well as the secret efforts to save these documents during times of conflict, such as the British burning of the Capitol in 1814 and during the darkest days of World War II. Books will be for sale and for signing at the end of the program, courtesy of our friends at the Next Chapter Books and More. They will be right back there for your signing pleasure. Now please help join me in welcoming our guest, Stephen Puleo.
Thanks, Alexa. We were joking earlier. There will be no jokes like, Alexa, what time does the lecture start? Yes, we went through that. She's heard it all. She's heard it all. She doesn't need to hear it. Is this good, John, Tom? This works good. Thank you. I'm on cable with this lav mic and in the room with this handheld. So that's why, if you're wondering why there's two mics, they don't coincide. So we'll do the best we can. And John Thomas will let me know, whether I'm moving around too much or whatever, which I do tend to do. So thank you for being here. It's an honor to be part of the Quincy 400 celebration. I really appreciate it, particularly to talk about this book, which came out in 2016. Very blessed with this book. I was able to speak at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. on this book. It was endorsed by the Archivist of the United States at the time when it came out. Spoke at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia on the book, and here I am in the City of Presidents, which is awesome too. So I really, really want to thank you for being here. I'm told that you guys are great book lovers, so I spoke to probably 5 or 6 of you beforehand. Great to see you all, and I just, really, you guys could be doing many different things on a night like tonight, so I do appreciate you being here. Come right in, have a seat. Thanks to Next Chapter. Always support your independent bookstores. These guys are doing great. We talked to them beforehand, so glad to hear that as well. And it's a really nice store and with very nice people. So this book, I first had the idea for this book when I read an item in a magazine that said, right after Pearl Harbor, a couple weeks after Pearl Harbor, on December 26th, 1941, the day after America's Pearl Harbor Christmas, the Library of Congress moved precious documents that included the original Declaration of Independence, the original Constitution, and the original Gettysburg Address from the Library of Congress, where they were at the time, to Fort Knox for safekeeping. Now, I thought I knew a lot about World War II. I've taught it, I've written about it, all of that, but I had never heard this story. So I just kind of pulled on that ball of yarn and said, I have to do some research. What is this all about? Come to find out, not only were those documents moved, thousands of other documents were moved out of Washington, D.C. to other repositories that I'll talk about in different parts of the country, mainly in the western part of the eastern states and into the Midwest. Fascinating. So then I thought, as I was doing this research and I was going through some of the documents, why? Like, what massive effort. This is a massive effort. Why did it happen? Why did people pay so much attention to these documents? Yeah, they're our founding documents, but man, this seems so incredible. And so the why is the documents themselves, the story of how they were created, how they came about, how they were protected in many cases in the years before. So suddenly the book became what was known in the publishing community as a braided narrative. So it goes back and forth from present day. At the time, the present day was about 1940 to about 1952. That's the present day of the book. And then I take you back and forth. I take you back to 1776, those 4 iconic days especially, July 1 to July 4th, when the Declaration of Independence is written and approved, when America votes for her independence on July 2nd, so there's a lot of that. I take you back to 1787, Philadelphia again, same city, Pennsylvania State House, now known as Independence Hall, where the Constitution is decided in this 4 months of tumultuous, exciting, dramatic debate. I take you back to 1814, which Alexa mentioned, when the British are burning Washington. And a clerk, a State Department clerk, unknown State Department clerk by the name of Stephen Pleasanton, saves the original Declaration and the original Constitution by stuffing them in a sack, a burlap sack, throws them in the back of a wagon, and takes them to Leesburg, Virginia. And Dolly Madison, while her husband, President James Madison, is on horseback in the field directing troops. Dolly Madison, she's famous for saving the painting of George Washington at the time, but she also saves what? Her husband's notes from the Constitutional Convention in 1787, the best account we have of the Constitutional Convention. So I'm thinking as I'm doing the research, I used James Madison's notes for this book. I would not have had the opportunity if Dolly hadn't saved them. She leaves just at the last minute as the White House is burning and is able to save those documents. So you learn a little bit about that in this book. I take you back to 1823 when Timothy Matlock, an engraver, unveils his exact, perfect facsimile of the Declaration of Independence. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams and President Monroe both thought the American people should be able to see this. We don't want to sort of disrupt the original. Can you create this facsimile? It takes him 3 years to get it done. This perfect, exact copy. And from that William Stone copy, millions of copies have been struck, almost every copy. Like if you go to the National Archives today, get the Declaration of Independence, it's probably the William Stone version of the Declaration. So that happens in 1823. I take you to 1826, right? The 50th anniversary of the founding of the country. July 4th, 1826, big celebration, and it becomes more iconic. Why? Because John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both die on July 4th, 1826. It really lifts July 4th to an almost reverential holiday. By the way, 5 years later, just coincidentally, in 1831, July 4th, 1831, James Monroe dies, another president, another founder, probably the last of the founders, presidential founders, I would say, actually fought during the Revolution and dies in 1831. So I take you back there. I take you back to 1863, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where President Abraham Lincoln, dedicating a Union cemetery, speaks for about 2.5 to 3 minutes. One of the most brilliant speeches in American history, where he talks about how we need to fix, doesn't use the word slavery, doesn't use the word war, Civil War, doesn't use the word North and South. But what he says is in order for America to realize her full potential, we need to make these changes. We need a new birth based in freedom. He talks about the importance of eradicating slavery for America to realize its promise. So you learn a little bit about that. You'll learn it all the way up to the Second World War and all the way up to 1952, when the original Constitution and the original Declaration are moved from the Library of Congress, right, to the National Archives to be on display for America to see. And when I say the original, there's people that use this word original copy. No, the originals, and here's what I mean by the originals. The so-called engrossed, that is, done with calligraphy and curlicues and swirls, engrossed on parchment. There's one copy of the Declaration of Independence engrossed on parchment, and it's in the National Archives. There is one copy of the Constitution of the United States engrossed on parchment, and it's in the National Archives. So when I say the original Declaration and the original Constitution, that's what I'm talking about. There were many copies of the Declaration, 25 or so, struck the night of July 4th, 1776, in a print shop the so-called Dunlop broadsides, signed only by John Hancock and by Charles Morgan, the Secretary of the Continental Congress. But the original that's engrossed on parchment is signed by all 56 delegates on August 2nd. Really, really kind of somber day. Talk a little bit about that. So think about this. Our documents, that's why these are so important. We are the first constitutional republic that can trace its founding back to an original document, the Declaration of Independence. Something I think we sometimes take for granted today. And I think we can really trace our founding back to the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. One paragraph, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are, what are they?
Life, liberty,
and the pursuit of happiness, right? And I would say that just as important as the second sentence in that paragraph, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just cause from the consent of the governed. This is amazing stuff in 1776. When people ask you, what's American exceptionalism? What do we mean by American exceptionalism? It doesn't mean that Americans think they're better than everyone else. Kind of a false meaning of American exceptionalism. It means that in an era of monarchs and despots and demagogues and dictators, we built or founded a country based on liberty and freedom, equality, and based on the power belonging to the governed, to the people. You were not subjects of a king, you were going to be citizens of a country. It really is quite an amazing paragraph when you read the Declaration. Jefferson writes this, it's iconic. If you're a writer, like if you're an author like me, you're sort of humbled by it. You'll never write anything so iconic or so lasting. But man, you're also so impressed. And I think Jefferson had to do this. He had to write it this way. Because had he just enumerated this list of grievances that the colonies had against Great Britain, which by the way is the whole back half of the Declaration of Independence, it's one grievance after another. If he had just done that, the European powers likely would have refused to become involved. He needed to have this soaring rhetoric so that it transcended this grievance. Otherwise, it's just a squabble between the mother country and the colonies. Jefferson realizes this, and he writes this soaring rhetoric because he needs to get the Europeans involved. Yes, he needs to get the colonists involved. Yes, it comes at a time very, very early in the war when nothing is guaranteed. But he writes this way to get the Europeans involved and on the side of this effort. So they can't really sit it out, is maybe a way to say that. And Jefferson was the person to do it too. There's a little debate at the beginning on who's going to write this thing, Adams or Jefferson. John Adams is actually the person who says to Jefferson, you should do it. Number one, he says, you're a Virginian, I'm from Massachusetts. Massachusetts people are considered far more radical. So maybe if you write this, there'll be more agreement among the delegates. Number two, John Adams says, I am far more obnoxious than you. You're kind of a likable guy, not me. So that's number two. Number three, you are 10 times the writer that I am. And so Jefferson takes on this task. Now keep in mind, the vote for independence happens on July 2nd. July 2nd of 1776. Jefferson's draft goes before the delegates late on the 3rd. And they edit it most of the night. There's a few edits back and forth, and it gets approved on the 4th, on July 4th. So there's that whole kind of misconception, because at the top of the Declaration it says, in Congress, July 4th, 1776. There's that whole misconception that that was the vote for independence. John Adams even said, July 2nd, from here on in, will be a day of parades, bonfires, celebrations, and bands. July 2nd, not July 4th. But that's one of the pieces of confusion. I think the other piece of confusion is that the Declaration was signed on July 4th, and it was not. First, it is engrossed by a calligrapher. It takes a couple of weeks to get it right. And on August 2nd, the delegates return to sign the document. It's a very emotional day in the Pennsylvania State House. By the way, if you haven't been to Independence Hall, worth going. Very, very chilling when you go in. You get goosebumps when you go in, and it's worth it. But it's almost a solemn day when they step up to sign, because this is a make or break moment for these delegates, right? They are putting their lives on the line. They are signing a document that is treasonous against the crown, and they are becoming public about it, really public about it, for the first time when they sign their names to it. And so they celebrate, but it's very low key. It's almost somber as they step up one after another to sign on parchment. My favorite story is that 69-year-old Rhode Island delegate Stephen Hopkins is about to sign, and he has a palsy, a little bit of Parkinson's, and his hand shook a little bit, as he signed it. A little bit shaky. If you see his signature, you'll note Stephen Hopkins has that shaky signature. And he stood up and he said, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." Really felt strongly about this pledge, right? Really felt strongly about this pledge to pledge their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor for this new country. So this huge moment, that's one of the reasons, or the big reason, we hold on to these documents. We protect these documents. 11 years later, same room, same exact room, the Constitution of the United States. Here's what's going on. We need to codify into some kind of legal language and some kind of law the principles that were articulated in 1776. Right? The Declaration is the end. The Constitution is the means, I would say, right? So even though it's happening 11 years later. And what's that famous preamble? You know it. We, the people of the United States. We, the people of the United States, right? In order to form a more perfect union. What's the next one? Establish justice.
Ensure domestic trade.
Yes.
Promote the general welfare.
Yes. Keep going. Yes. Wait, here's the mic.
Amen.
No. Oh, excellent. And secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. We hereby what? We hereby what? Yeah. The Constitution of the United States. Excellent. Excellent. So it's this notion that it's we the people of the United States. We the people. And by the way, in 1787, probably more accurate to say we the people of the States United, right? We're kind of not the United States yet, but we are these united states in small u, small a. So yeah, we the people of the United States. 1863. So here's how I look at the Gettysburg Address. It's not a founding document, but it certainly is an extension of the founding documents, right? It certainly is an extension of the founding documents. So what's Lincoln trying to do? Think about this, it's 1863. Now, the North has won at Gettysburg, the North has won at Vicksburg. It looks pretty good by the North, but it's by no means over. By no means. There is deadly fighting that's going to happen in 1864 in Virginia, particularly. Really, really bad fighting. So it's not over yet. But what Lincoln's doing in the cemetery, and if you haven't been to Gettysburg, go to Gettysburg and go to the cemetery. If you've only been to the battlefield, just go a little further down and go to the cemetery. It's worth it. It's, again, goosebump material. Goosebump material. And so what's he trying to do here in 1863? The founding documents missed one big thing, and that's slavery, right? It's not mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. It's only alluded to in the Constitution in three somewhat ambiguous ways. This was necessary in order to get these documents approved. There was no chance the North Carolinians, the South Carolinians, the Georgians, and probably the Virginians were going to ratify either of these two documents if there was an out-and-out statement against slavery. Lincoln in 1863 kind of makes that correction when he talks about a new birth of freedom that the country needs to experience in order for a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people, not to perish from the earth. In order to continue this experiment, this idea that we started 77 years ago, right? Our fathers created what? Created what on this continent? A nation conceived in liberty, like conceived in liberty, absolutely, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. But maybe we haven't achieved that yet. That's the Gettysburg Address. It's a very short document, by the way. All these documents are pretty short. You should go home and read them tonight. Declaration, short. Constitution, man, you can read in the amount it will take you to watch 1.5 hour television show. You can read it. Gettysburg Address, a commercial. A commercial. These are the documents that President Franklin Roosevelt, Library of Congress, Director Archibald MacLeish, and Secret Service Executive Director, kind of an assistant director, Harry Neal, wanted to save in 1941. They did it because they revered the founding documents. They knew how important they were. So they came up with a plan. Roosevelt asked MacLeish in 1940, so we're not at war yet. War is in Europe. To come up with a plan to list, catalog, analyze all of the documents he would consider utterly irreplaceable. That's the quote, utterly irreplaceable. And to come up with a plan on where to move them. What can we do? They start working on that in 1940. MacLeish, who wept when the Nazis goose-stepped into Paris, really emotionally affects him. He's a poet, not a professional librarian. Roosevelt basically hires him to take this task on because Roosevelt thinks the official library community, no offense, Alexa, where are you? Okay. The official library community would be too bureaucratic. They'd be arguing too much about what's irreplaceable, what isn't, et cetera, et cetera. He thinks MacLeish is the person to lead this effort. They talk about it. MacLeish's staff talks about it. The whole Library of Congress gets involved in this. And they list 6 different tiers of documents that they consider utterly irreplaceable. Tier number 1, the original Declaration of Independence, the original Constitution, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's second inaugural, the Articles of Confederation, and 2 non-American documents, the Magna Carta, copy of the Magna Carta that was on display at the 1939 New York World's Fair, and the British asked us to hold on to it when war breaks out. And the Gutenberg Bible, which we took possession of from the Benedictine monks in Austria in 1925. Hold on to those. That's tier 1. Tier 2 is like the other presidential papers, James Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention, et cetera, all the way down. There's a letter from Queen Victoria to Mary Todd Lincoln when Abraham is assassinated, expressing her regret and saying she went through something similar when Prince Albert died. You know, those kinds of documents. Pierre L'Enfant's original design of Washington, D.C. lays out Washington, D.C. That's in those groups of documents. So they come up with this list just for safekeeping. We're not at war yet. 1940 into late 1940, even early 1941. We're not at war yet. But they talk about the importance of these documents. So think about one of the things they mention is how these documents were very hard to come by. We should never take them for granted. Never should you take anything in history for granted. They were not foregone conclusions. They were not predestined to have them. In 1776, right, it's just like you learned in high school. A third of the population didn't want to break away from Britain. A third did, and a third was ambivalent. That's nothing new, right? That's how things have always been. That's how it was. John Dickinson, delegate for Pennsylvania, said, "What do you guys mean we're going to break away from England? That would be like crossing the Atlantic Ocean in a skiff made of paper. Why would we do that now? We have no idea how this war is going to go even. What are you talking about?" So there wasn't this like total groundswell. Yes, Adams wanted it. Yes, Jefferson wanted it. Yes, others wanted it. But it took sweat to get there. The Constitution of the United States almost comes to a dead stop. In fact, does come to a dead stop. Those 4 months, sometime around early July, late June, we have this massive battle that breaks out at the Constitutional Convention between people who wanted a large central government, like Madison, and other delegates, smaller state delegates, who were very, very wary of a large central government. So Washington, Madison, Hamilton wanted Congress bicameral, two separate legislatures, a House and something else. They wanted something bicameral, but they also wanted it to be decided totally by population. Totally. Representation by population alone. Small state people said, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?" Gunning Bedford of Delaware says, "We do not, gentlemen, trust you. Delaware would be swallowed up by Pennsylvania and Virginia and Massachusetts and some of those large states. We're not going to agree to this." Just before the 4th of July in 1787, Roger Sherman of Connecticut says, "We are at a dead stop. We are at a dead stop." The delegates break. They kind of walk around Philadelphia for this 4th of July ceremonies and celebrations, and they break. And they come back with kind of this renewed sense of purpose. And what do? They do what every political body does when they need to break a logjam. They form a committee. They form a committee. The committee goes off and comes back around July 15th with what would be known as the Great Compromise. What was the Great Compromise? Yeah, we're going to have a bicameral legislature. At one level, this House of Representatives, representation is going to be decided by the population of the state. But at this other level, we've decided we're going to call it the Senate, based on Roman tradition. Every state will get 2. Every state will get 2. That's the Great Compromise, which is what we have today, of course, that saves the Constitutional Convention in 1787. But it was hard to come by. It almost ended. The Constitutional Convention almost ends, breaks up. When you read the letters from the delegates and the documents, you're shocked that they came that close to ending the Constitutional Convention. And then there's Lincoln in 1863, right? Yes, Yes, it looks good for the North, but it's not a fait accompli. Lincoln almost doesn't go to Gettysburg. Think about this. He's invited at the last minute to go to Gettysburg. He's not the guest speaker. Edward Everett is the guest speaker, the renowned orator. Lincoln's asked to say a few words. Writes page 1 in the Executive Mansion. Writes page 2, not on the train to Gettysburg, which is the great myth, but I kind of like the folklore. But he writes page 2 when he gets to Gettysburg, at the house that he's staying. Writes page 2. Talks a little bit with Edward Everett to make sure, that they aren't going to overlap. Everett has a 2-hour speech, so it's very possible they could overlap, right? He's going to cover a lot of ground in that speech. And Lincoln finally delivers this 2.5 to 3 minute speech. That's brilliant. And Edward Everett says to him, you said in 2 minutes what I couldn't get said in 2 hours. But it wasn't a fait accompli. And so that's what McLeish and his team discuss. And so after Pearl Harbor, after December 7th, 1941, the Library of Congress swings into action. Now during the previous summer, they had looked all over for where these documents could go. Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, said, well, we have a tiny bit of space at Fort Knox. Small bit of, mostly it's gold bullion here. We've been moving gold bullion in for the last 4 years, since 1937. But we have a little space that we can help you out with. But you're going to have to find space for everything else. Well, the Library of Congress is trying to figure out where those could be. They go to 30 separate institutions along the Allegheny Ridge, basically, in the Midwest. And they finally decide on 4 places that seem particularly good to bring thousands of boxes of documents. The University of Virginia in Charlottesville, Virginia Military Institute in Washington and Lee in Lexington, Virginia, and Denison University in Granville, Ohio. Those are the 4 spots that are going to be good in terms of things like humidity and vermin, things that could chew at the corners of documents, like these really good repositories. They find out later that VMI is too damp, so they move all that stuff to Denison. So really there's 3 final places: University of Virginia at Charlottesville, Washington and Lee in Lexington, which I've been to, great spot. Right next to VMI, by the way, literally right next to it. And Denison, which I have not been to, but I have heard from readers who went to Denison University and knew of that story. So they were brought there. That's where they decided to bring these documents. And then, there's those documents, those first-tier documents that are going to go to Fort Knox. So on December 26th, 1941, Secret Service agent Harry Neal accompanies 4 cases to Union Station in Washington, D.C. Now, December 26th, 1941 is a very big public day in the nation's history. Why? Winston Churchill has come to address a joint session of Congress. First time that's happened. So big public fanfare. Very quiet and very secretly, around 5 p.m., it's dark, Harry Neal accompanies these cases to Union Station and puts on board the Baltimore and Ohio train the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the documents that I mentioned. Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's second inaugural Articles of Confederation, Gutenberg Bible, and the Magna Carta. 2 Secret Service agents accompany it to Fort Knox. And the documents are placed in Fort Knox, where they will remain until September of 1944. That is post D-Day, with one exception that I'll tell you about in a second. And in the next 5 months, so into 1942, 700 employees amass about 5,000 boxes of documents in the basement of the Library of Congress. And they are sent out by truck, for the most part by truck, some by train, to these locations that I mentioned, all in complete secrecy. Nobody leaks it to the press. One reporter got wind in Lexington, Virginia, when she saw boxes that, lo and behold, said Library of Congress on the side. McLeish called her and asked her not to do the story, not to give away that these precious documents, which had now been moved out of Washington, D.C., out of the fear of German, potentially, U-boat saboteurs, maybe bombers, certainly saboteurs. Yes, there was a lot of fanfare, but not that much. Not that much. So that occurs all the way up until May, that these documents are moved out. Now keep in mind, that first 5 or 6 months of 1942, U-boats are sinking merchant ships right off the coast, right off the Quincy coast, right off Cape Cod, right off Cape May, right off Cape Hatteras, right? All the way down to Jacksonville, Kittery to Jacksonville. They're sinking. So there's real fear. There's palpable fear. I think it's hard for us to grasp today. There's palpable fear of a German invasion, of an East Coast invasion, as there is on the West Coast of a Japanese invasion, right? But there is real fear. Washington is transformed almost overnight after Pearl Harbor. Lots of things that were suggested don't happen, like there were suggestions, for example, to paint the White House black. Never happened. There were suggestions to reroute the Potomac and the Anacostia rivers, because where those two rivers come together, pilots could get a fix on the White House, which is about 1 mile past where they came together. Well, that didn't happen. But many things did happen. The White House went dark. White House staff were given gas masks. Roosevelt kept his on his wheelchair. Secret Service builds a 760-foot secret tunnel from the White House to the Treasury building right nearby for Roosevelt and his staff to escape. It's completely stocked with food, with water, with bedding, with an office, etc. Roosevelt said to Henry Morgenthau, "I will not ever go down in that tunnel unless I can play poker with all the money in your vault downstairs." It's described really in detail in Secret Service documents. However, I will share with you this. The Secret Service still, or at least when I wrote this book, does not release photos of that tunnel. I was dealing with the Secret Service archivist, who's a great guy. We were like on a first name basis, going back and forth. He's sending me documents, etc. So at one point I say, hey, can I get some photos of the secret tunnel, the 760-foot secret tunnel? I don't hear anything back via email. A couple weeks later, I get a letter in the mail. Dear Mr. Puleo. I'm like, who's this Mr. Puleo? Like, we've been Steve, we've been Buzz. Yeah. Dear Mr. Puleo, your request is hereby denied. That photos are still highly classified, blah, 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 with his signature under. So still have not seen any photos of that tunnel, but that happens. There are sentries placed around government buildings in Washington, D.C. So there's this real fear. The documents get moved to these places that are kind of out of reach of this area, of the Germans, and of potential sabotage. And again, it's all done in secrecy. Could we do that today? I don't know. But it was all done today. Questions at the very end, I swear, at the end.
At the end?
Yes, is that okay? Yes. So, they get moved, and I told you they were there until September of 1944, with one exception. One exception. In April of 1943, the war is a slog at this point for Americans, right? The kind of Pearl Harbor patriotism thing has dissipated in 42. Guadalcanal happens in the summer of 42. By 43, this war is dragging on. There are lots of casualties. Tough times. Roosevelt decides it's time to dedicate the Jefferson Memorial. It's being built. And he wants to have the original Declaration of Independence on display. April of 43. And so secretly, again, the Secret Service brings it out from Fort Knox, sets it up. 5,000 people attend the ceremony. Thousands for 1 week. It's under 24-hour guard, Marine Guard, all night long for people to file by and see the Declaration. So that happens then. And it's one of the things that reminds me, again, of what these documents are. So yeah, they're artifacts. They're certainly artifacts, right? They're primary source documents. You know, we take care of them. We protect them. They're now, you know, under humidity and climate-controlled cases. We restore them when we need restoring. So they're artifacts for sure. They're symbols. They are symbols for sure. Go to the National Archives Rotunda if you haven't been there, right? And here are these documents in these cases. The lights are very low. There's guards around them. Talking is even kept to a minimum. My wife was a principal of a Catholic school. We would take 8th graders down every year to Washington, D.C. And we go to the National Archives, and we go to the Rotunda. And I will tell you, there was a quiet and a little bit of reverence from the kids, not just our kids, but many of the school kids that are down there. I did have one tour. I was down there talking to our kids about the documents, and I heard a kid from another school say, hey, I want to join that guy's tour, which I was very excited about. But it's just this quiet, symbolic moment when you view these documents. And again, that's what happened outside the Jefferson Memorial, right? It's this symbolism. And what else are they? They're a third thing. They're artifacts, they're symbols, right? And they are our governing blueprint. They are our governing blueprint. Every time you hear somebody say, right, will the president have enough votes to sustain this veto? Is this bill constitutional or unconstitutional, right? That's from the Constitution. I did a thing at Lynn Classical not too long ago, and it was on the Constitution. And man, we had this great discussion about constitutional issues, and I said to the kids, how many have read the Constitution? Not a single hand went up. So I said, how do you guys know something is unconstitutional if you haven't read the Constitution? One kid says, that's a good question, and said to me, will you come back if we read it? I said, yes, I'll come back. He goes, the kid says, you know, it's not really a very high threshold, is it? No, it isn't. But it would be good if you did that. It's our governing document. Every single day, you revert back to what's in the Constitution, and you revert back to that second paragraph in the Declaration of Independence. No matter what level you're at, no matter what organization you're in, no matter how important you are or someone else is, it all comes back to that. Is this fair? All men are created equal. Is this fair? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, whatever your happiness definition is, the pursuit of property, as it was often called then. And happiness didn't have this same, you know, kind of connotation of giddiness and jumping and partying, but it's this ability to kind of live your life the way you want to live your life in kind of a free way. Everything that we do goes back to these documents. So they're blueprints. They're artifacts, they're symbols, and they're blueprints. That's what McLeish was protecting. That's what Pleasanton was protecting years before that. That's what Harry Neal was protecting and Roosevelt was protecting. And finally, in September of 44, McLeish says, all right, think about this, September of 44, 3 months after D-Day. Allies are moving. They'll get stopped at the Battle of the Bulge for a while. But they're moving towards Germany. There's hard fighting ahead, don't get me wrong, much hard fighting ahead. 8, 9 months of hard fighting ahead. But the chances of a German invasion now are almost nil. German saboteurs, almost nil. We've taken thousands and thousands of German prisoners. And so McLeish says, bring these documents over the Blue Ridge and over the Alleghenies, and let's bring them back. And they do, to the Library of Congress. One other quick thing, and then I'll get to questions. Do you remember your question? Excellent. Oh, I know you do. I know you do. One other quick thing. 1952, December 15th, Bill of Rights Day, 1952. There's a big ceremony in Washington, D.C. The Library of Congress is about to transfer the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution to the National Archives. Now, lots of infighting led up to this. The Library of Congress does not want to give these documents up. They don't want to give these documents up. They are their prized possessions. But President Truman had been pushing for this because he wants them on display in the archives for Americans to be able to see. And so this ceremony, really another emotional ceremony, happens on Bill of Rights Day. There's flags. The states process in the order in which they ratify the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. And Harry Truman says during his speech that these documents, he talks about the physical nature of the documents. He talks about if you put the Constitution up, the 4 leaves of the Constitution up, you can see Article 1, which is Congress, takes up almost 2 pages. Article 2, which is the executive branch, takes up 3/4 of a page. Article 3, which is the court branch, takes up just 1/4 of a page. And then the 4th page are the rest of the articles and the signatures. He talks about the importance of the Constitution being closest to the people through Congress. That's why here it is, it's a symbol again, right? Physically, when you look at the Constitution, you know automatically that Congress has more powers. Physically, just look at it. And you can see it, and Truman talks about that. And then he says, yes, it's important to preserve these documents, but it's much, much more important to preserve the ideals that are in these documents. That maybe by moving them here, succeeding generations will recognize that import, recognize that solemnity, recognize the importance of kind of perpetuating the principles that are in that document. So now it's our turn and our chance and our opportunity, right, to protect and to endorse those ideals. So I hope that we are up to it. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. Quincy. And so we're going to do questions, and I will repeat the questions because the cable people need to hear them, so I want to make sure that happens. Would you like to go first, ma'am? Oh, yes.
Yeah, when you were talking about people were preparing for invasion after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
In my dad's diary, which he kept in the early 40s, he wrote that probably in early 42, over at the school where he taught, the custodian painted the top half of his headlights so that would be less visible from above.
Yeah, so, and what's your first name?
Kathy.
So Kathy just pointed out that your dad, in his diary, in his notes in early 42, said, now how old was your dad then? Just to,
He was about 40.
he was about 40, so probably, so past the time of serving. I just wanted to kind of, yes. Her dad had to paint the top half of his headlights black, so that it almost like a blackout, so there would be no lights. And yeah, that happened, you know, throughout most, although it does take a long time. It takes several months for some of the big cities. New York City is one of them, Miami is. German U-boat captains are talking about how the lights of Coney Island are silhouetting these merchant ships as they're basically sitting ducks for German. So it takes them a long time. In Miami Beach, they were very concerned about the nightclub business going downhill. So it takes a while for the blackouts to to set in. But yeah, great story. Excellent. What else? Who else we got for questions? Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
So you talk about preserving the original. What do we have of that copy that they worked on to edit? So here's our working draft. How many of those edits do we have? In other words, I believe we have some of Lincoln's, edits and scrawlings. And how much do we have for the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution? Thinking today, when we erase all drafts,
Yeah.
we have just the final, our texts are not going to be saved, our emails are, so we will have a harder time telling history with fewer sources. But what do we have of those?
Yeah, so the question is, what do we have in first draft form, before the final? So you're right, the Gettysburg Address, there's numerous Lincoln kind of first drafts, crossouts, things like that. And of course, the Gettysburg Address is never done on parchment, never engrossed, right? It's manuscript copy. So several of those are at the Lincoln, in Springfield, Illinois, at the Lincoln Library, and at other repositories. The Declaration of Independence and Constitution, not so much. So we have the Dunlop broadside. I think there are now 26 copies of that broadside that's actually printed that night in his shop. And there are a couple of corrections that are made at the top, very few, but you can match those now to the original. And then Timothy Matlock fixes those when he does the engrossing on the calf skin. But we don't have lots of drafts. So the Constitution was done in total secrecy. So drafts were not allowed. The delegates couldn't even write letters from there saying what happens. Almost all the letters, with the exception of Madison's notes, almost all the letters from Philadelphia, if they're written in the moment, say, let's make sure we get the crops in. And almost all the Constitution-related stuff is written after the fact. So we don't have a lot of that kind of first draft that you're talking about. It's sort of interesting. It's not like, for example, Roosevelt's date of infamy speech. The first draft is very prominent, and
How do we know about the discussions then for the Declaration? Just from letters and from diaries?
Yeah, from letters, diaries, and again, Madison's notes. Like, this is why Dolly Madison's contribution was so important, because Madison's notes, without question, are the most important primary source we have from the Constitutional Convention. So she doesn't save those, they burn. It's just like, it's already making my heart hurt just thinking about that. So it was just such a great moment that she was able to think of that. What else? Yes. I'll come to you next. Yeah. Yes.
I know that people can use the Library of Congress for research. What kind of things would you need the actual original documents for research? And do you think that anybody was trying to do that kind of research during the time when those documents were out of Washington? Would any scholar have noticed they weren't available?
Yeah, that's a great question. What kind of original documents would you need for research? Would any scholar realize that they weren't available? I think I'll start with the second question. I think yes, that did happen. McLeish and his staff set up these kind of dummy, I guess I'll call them fake documents, just for looks when they went in. Now, they got lots of questions, and they got lots of questions about war things. They actually set up this little, I would say, table of experts for people who would say, hey, how do you make blackout paint? What's the chemical composition of blackout paint? And they would respond to these questions. But many times during the war, and there were exceptions, the Library of Congress was closed for that very reason that you're asking about. It was closed. There were certain parts that were off limits. For example, now you go to the Library of Congress, the Gutenberg Bible is one of the first things you see. There it is. It's gorgeous. So that's where it was. I don't think it's moved at all, but because it's missing, yes, people would say, where's the Gutenberg Bible? So yes, good question. Yes, ma'am.
Were all of these documents that were saved related to politics? Were there movies, books?
Yeah, great question. Were all these documents related to politics, or were they movies or books? No, movies, books, Stradivarius violin. The National Gallery of Art moves a ton of paintings, Raphael's, Goya's, Donatelli's, to the Biltmore in North Carolina. I've been in that room too, where those things were taken. So yes, there's this kind of massive effort to get, I would say, anything of value. Movies also were in that like 5th or 6th tier. That's how they kind of categorize them. But yeah, there's this massive effort to get things out of Washington, D.C. With the Magna Carta, here's how secret it was. The Magna Carta, Archibald MacLeish tells the British ambassador, the day the document's being moved, we are moving this document to a safe place. Doesn't say Fort Knox, just says we are moving this document to a safe place. So it was all highly secretive, but yes, much was moved out of D.C. Excellent question. What else? All right. Quincy, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll be signing some books. If you want to get on my mailing list, feel free. I do 3 to 4 newsletters a year. I do not spam you. You won't get everything, something every day from me. You'll get it occasionally. If you're not on my mailing list, please get on. My next newsletter is going out, I want to tell you, like next week. So you want to jump on that. People have asked me what the next book's about. When you're on that mailing list, you'll be one of the first several thousand people to know. Not in the next issue, but soon. So thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Yes.